Hello and welcome to my English class. Today I will explain conditionals. If you could go out, where would you go first? This is an example of a conditional sentence. Conditionals are sentences which consist of two parts. A part that contains a condition, the clause that has the if in it, and a part which contains the result. In this case, where would you go first? There are three basic conditional types. Type 1. An example of a type 1 conditional is if Mary has time, she will visit or visits me. In this sentence, the reference is in the present or future. The action is highly possible. Type 2. If Mary had time, she would visit me. In this sentence, the reference is not in the past, even if we have here a verb in the past tense. The reference is in the present, but we use the past tense in order to make the difference between what is real and what is not real. The action is impossible in the present, but it can be fulfilled under certain circumstances. Type 3. If Mary had had time, she would have visited me. The reference is in the past. The action is impossible, so it expresses a regret. Type 1. The first conditional. The first conditional is used to talk about things which are possible in the present or in the future. In other words, things which may happen. We translate it into Romanian as voi merge. An example, if it's sunny, we'll go to the park. This means maybe it will be sunny, so we will go to the park. That's possible. Other examples of the type 1 conditional, if it rains, I will stay at home. If he plays football, he will be a footballer. If he gets great ideas, he will invent new things. If he has enough time, he will travel around the world. In all these examples, we have in the if clause, in this part of the sentence, which contains the word if, a condition which is highly possible. So it is possible to rain, so I will stay at home. We also have the word unless, which means the same as if not. Notice that unless means the same as if not. It is used with the positive form of the verb. Compare. Your bird will fly away if you don't close the window. Or, your bird will fly away unless you close the window. So, basically, we say the same thing but in two different ways. If we choose to use the if word, then we will use a negative verb. If we choose to use unless, then we have to put the verb in its affirmative form. Other examples: unless he asks you politely, refuse to do any more work on the project. Unless prices are rising, it's not a good investment. Unless you've been there yourself, you don't really understand how fantastic it is. As you can notice, we can use different present tenses in the if clause, but here in the main clause we have to use the present tense, an imperative or a present tense. The order of the main clause and the conditional clause may change. So we don't necessarily have to start a conditional sentence with the conditional clause. In this case, we start with it. If I have enough money, I will go to US. So this means if we put the conditional clause first, we have to put a comma after it. We have to separate the if clause, the conditional clause, by a comma from the main clause. But it is the same way to say or to start with the main clause. I will go to US if I have enough money. In this case, we don't have to use the comma anymore. The if clause can be used with different present forms. Examples. If I go to New York again, I'll buy you a souvenir from the Empire State Building. So here we use the present, simple, and in the main clause we will use the future. Another example, if he's feeling better, he'll come. If he's feeling better, here we also use a present, but a present continuous, and in the main clause we still keep the future form. And the last example, if she hasn't heard the bad news yet, I'll tell her. Here, as you can notice, we have used the present perfect, hasn't heard. But in the main clause, we stick to the future tense. The main clause can contain going to future or future perfect if needed. So these are the only changes we can make in the main clause. So two examples. If I see him, I'm going to tell him exactly how angry I am. Here we use this near future I am going to tell instead of will. In the next example, if we don't get the contract, we'll have wasted a lot of time and money. Which means that in the main clause here, we have used the future perfect. The main clause can contain modal verbs if needed. Examples. If you go to New York, you must have the cheesecake in Lindy's. So in the main clause, we can also use a modal verb, as in this case must, instead of will. Another example, if he comes, you can get a lift home with him. A modal with can, an example with the modal can. Here you have 5 sentences. You can press the pause button to the video and you can try to practice with these 5 sentences. The first conditional. So, when you finish, continue playing the video. We will move now to the second conditional, so type 2 of conditional sentences, which we call in English second conditional. The second conditional is used to talk about things that are impossible or about situations which are hypothetical in the present or future. So these situations are unreal or imagined. This doesn't mean that they are impossible at all. They are impossible in the present, but they can be possible under certain conditions. Let's see some examples. If I were a doctor, I would check the patients. How do we interpret this sentence? In the if clause, you can notice that we use a verb in the past tense, in the past simple tense. And in the main clause, we use the present conditional, which is the auxiliary verb would and the first form of the verb. This means that I am not a doctor in the present, so I don't check the patients, but under specific or certain condition. For example, if I am going to follow the university or the medicine school, probably I will become a doctor and then I could check the patients. So this sentence means that the result expressed in the main clause can be fulfilled only under certain circumstances, under certain conditions. The next example, if they graduated from university, they would find good jobs. Again, they haven't graduated the university, so this is not a real situation, it is an imagined situation, which means we have to use a past tense form again here in the if clause, and we continue in the main clause with the same structure by using the auxiliary would followed by the first form of the verb. Another example, if he played a musical instrument, which is not true in the present, he would be popular. So, if I had millions of dollars, I'd give a lot to charity. But unfortunately, the situation in the present is different, so I don't have money, I am not able to give to charity. For the second conditional, you have to learn this thing that the form were, which we usually use only for the plural, replaces was. So instead of was, we always use this form with all the persons. Because, again, we express in this type of sentences, second conditional, we express some unreal situations. If I were a rich man, I would stop working as a clerk. If I were you, I would buy the green dress. If I were to lose my job, I wouldn't be able to pay for my dream car. If she were, so here is where you have to notice this. I don't say if she was happy, but if she were happy in her job, she wouldn't be looking for another one. If I lived in Japan, I'd have sushi every day. And the last example, if they were to enter our market, we'd have big problems. The form if I were you, which is also an expression in English, if I were you, dacă aș fi în locul tău, it is used to give advice. We have some examples. If I were you, I'd look for a new place to live. If I were you, I'd go back to school and get more qualifications. So if I were you, but I am not. Now, what you have to notice is that the choice between the first and the second conditional is often a question of the speaker's attitude rather than a fact. If you compare these examples, you will notice the difference. Imagine that Otto thinks these things are possible, but Peter doesn't. According to their perspective of the facts, they build their message in different ways. Otto, if I win the lottery, I'll buy a big house. So if you can see, Otto is the optimistic of the two. So if I win the lottery, I'll buy a big house. So he thinks he can win the lottery, and as a fact, he will buy a big house. Peter, which is the more pessimistic, if I won the lottery, I'd buy a big house. So for Peter, this is something impossible or improbable. So it is only a hypothetical situation for him, and that's why here he built his message using the verb to win in the past tense, won. So a second conditional here, And Otto uses the present simple of the verb to win, so he builds a first conditional. Another example, if I get promoted, I'll throw a big party, which means Otto is very hopeful that he will be promoted. So this is why he builds his message using the first conditional. Peter says if I got promoted, I'd throw a big party. But he is very skeptical about this, so he sees the situation as an hypothetical one. That's why he builds his message using the second conditional. We can use in the if clause past simple or past continuous. If I was still working in Brighton, I would commute by train if I was still working in Brighton. Another example, it is still a past tense, but a past continuous. If she were coming, she would be here by now. If she were coming. If they were thinking of selling, I would want to buy. Also, in the second conditional, we can make some changes in the main clause, and we can use, besides would, other modal verbs which are could or might. Examples: if I had the chance to do it again, I would do it differently. The second, if we met up for lunch, we could go to that new restaurant. And in the last example, if I spoke to him directly, I might be able to persuade him. So here, another modal verb which we can use in the main clause in the second condition. And now the type 3 conditional, which we also call the third conditional. The third conditional is used to talk about hypothetical situations in the past. We talk about regrets, in fact, because we cannot change the past anymore. So what happened in the past happened, and we cannot change those things or those situations, but we can talk about them expressing our regrets. In Romanian, we translate it with aș fi mers. Let's see how it works. We have some examples here. If he had lived in France, he would have been a lawyer. So this regret that he didn't live in France, so he is not a lawyer. If he had finished his work, he would have gone home. If he had finished his work, he would have gone home, so a regret. And the last example, if she had had more money, she would have bought a new bicycle. More examples? What you can notice here is that we keep the same structure. In the if clause, we use the past perfect form, so the auxiliary had, which is unchanged, and the third form of the verb each time. In the main clause, we use the past conditional, so the auxiliary would plus the auxiliary have and the third form of the verb. So would have, which remains unchanged every time, and the third form of the verb. Now you can notice that the main clause can also contain would, could, or might. So we can replace the word would here with could or with might. Let's see some examples. If I had seen him at the meeting, I would have asked him. The explanation, but he wasn't there, so I didn't. I only expressed this regret. If I had seen him at the meeting, I could have asked him, but he wasn't there, so it wasn't possible. Here, we talk about a possibility. If I had seen him at the meeting, I might have asked him, which means that I am not sure, probably yes, probably not. Perhaps if the opportunity had arisen, I might have asked him. And the last example, if I had paid more attention in class, I would have understood the lesson. Also notice that sometimes the if clause is implied rather than spoken. So sometimes we don't say this part of the sentence, the conditional clause, at all. Examples: I'd have done it. I'd have done it. I would have done it. So it's enough. It is clear. It is a clear message. I don't necessarily have to complete the sentence with this part if you had asked me, but you didn't. Another example, I wouldn't have said that if I'd been there. But if I only say I wouldn't have said that, it is clear enough. The message is clear enough. And the last example, he wouldn't have let him get away with that if he had tried that with me. So it is enough. What you have to notice is that sometimes we don't say all these words here, the if clause, because they are implied, called zero conditional. Then when we talk about things that are generally or always true. For example, if he gets there before me, ask him to wait. So what we use in these types of sentences are in the conditional clause if, when, or unless. Then we follow the same structure as for the first conditional, a present form, and then a present simple or an imperative in the main clause. Here we have an imperative. If he gets there before me, ask him to wait. Please ask him to wait. So I ask you, it is an imperative. Another example with when this time. So when you fly budget airline, you have to pay for your drinks and snacks. So this is generally true, always true. Unless you need more space, a small car is big enough for one person. As you can see, it is also generally true. Okay. What is different in these types of sentences, which we call zero conditional, is the fact that we are not talking about a specific event, but something which is generally true. Again, in case of zero conditional, we can have a variety of present forms in the condition clause, and in the result clause or in the main clause there can only be present simple or imperative, so we cannot change this form of the verb with anything else. Examples: if you visit London, go on the London Eye. If unemployment is rising, people tend to stay in their present jobs. So here a present continuous. But in the main sentence, we keep it in the present simple. If you've done that, go and have a coffee. If you've done that, if you have done, so here we have a present perfect and here an imperative, go and have a coffee. When you go on holiday, take plenty of sun cream. It will be very hot. A variation here with when, okay? When I'm concentrating, please don't make so much noise. Here we use the present continuous, but here, again, an imperative. And the last example, when I've finished an article, I always ask Kate to read it through. Present perfect here, but present simple here. So this is what you should notice, that in the if clause or when, usually these are conditional clauses. Okay, here we can use different present tenses, continuous or perfect, but here we can only use present or imperative now. Imperative. So here you have a table containing on the first column the types of the conditional clauses, type 1, 2, 3. In the second column we have the if clause, the conditional clause, and on the third column we have the main clause or the result clause. And here you have the structure you have to use. So here is something very briefly, something you can remember. In the if clause, we use present tense. In the main clause, we can only use present, future, or imperative. In case of type 2, you have to use past tense in the if clause and the present conditional, which means would or could or might plus verb 1 in the main clause. For the type 3 conditional, you will use a past perfect tense in the if clause and a past conditional in the main clause, which means would or could or might plus have plus the third form of the verb. This was the lesson about conditional sentences. I wish you luck. Goodbye.